Loneliness doesn't always look like what we imagine. It's not just the person eating alone or walking the street without anyone to call. Sometimes it's the person in the crowd who feels invisible. The teenager scrolling through 1,000 friends on their phone and still feeling unwanted. The older man in a nursing home who hasn't had a visitor in weeks. The young woman who prays every day for someone just to ask how she's doing. And sometimes it's us, each of us. According to a study by Cigna, nearly half of all Americans report feeling lonely sometimes or always. The same study found that Generation Z, ages 18 through 22, is the loneliest generation, with 79% of the respondents feeling loneliness. Studies also show that loneliness and social isolation are associated with higher risks for health problems such as heart disease, depression, and cognitive decline. Loneliness also reduces the number of antibodies we produce to fight infection and may make us more susceptible to cancer. Loneliness is a serious problem that we as a country must face in an honest and concrete way. We live in a world that promises connection but delivers distraction. Today on Friar Time, we will ask Brother Paul O'Keefe, a Franciscan friar and an LCSW, a social worker and therapist, some hard questions about loneliness. Why are we so lonely? What does loneliness do to the soul? And how, through faith, friendship, and the example of Christ, can we find each other again? This is Friar Time, so let's start talking. Welcome, Paul, and thank you for being here with us.
Good to be here.
So now, more people than ever are saying that they feel empty, isolated, or invisible, even when they're not really physically alone. So, why do you think so many people are today quietly asking, does anyone actually see me? Am I invisible?
I think that's a really good question. What is the breakdown in society that has made this a reality for so many people in the country? If you look at our traditional societies, they were built in ways that people would socialize. So, for instance, in my own family, the Italian tradition of Sunday dinners, where you'd get together with your family, you'd socialize, you'd get to know what's going on in people's lives, and other things in our society where people could join societies or groups or just go down to the bar, say, and have a drink. Some of those things have broken down. Certainly, family is different today than it used to be.
Yeah.
And so many people experience loneliness because there aren't those social safety nets that there used to be. Also, with the advent of social media, we feel like we're part of a community when in fact it's an artificial one. It's a virtual community that we don't interact with in the same way as you and I are here,
Right.
talking together and in each other's presence. So these are some of the factors I think that people feel more lonely.
So now you just mentioned the digital world, social media. So we've obviously never been more digitally connected, and yet people say they've never felt more alone. So we post, we scroll, we click, we swipe. But what do we really? How do we really connect in that? I think you were touching on that. How do we connect in that social media world? So is social media really turning loneliness kind of into a way of life? And are we too distracted to even notice when someone's falling apart?
Yeah, I think we have to distinguish between loneliness and isolation. Social media can keep us isolated. So we have this supposition that we're part of a community, but we're only observing that community. We're not physically participating. And you may have heard of this FOMO, fear of fear of missing out.
Hmm.
I think a lot of young people, especially, live in this artificial world of Instagram and Facebook where they see people having wonderful experiences and great lives and just really flashy kind of things. When the reality is that life isn't really like that. And so people feel like they're missing out if they're not experiencing some of these things they're seeing on social media. So that further creates this isolation where people feel like they're not part of society. unless they're experiencing it in the way that they're seeing on social media.
So it's like expectations in this social media world are not real, but I don't know that if I'm just viewing it.
Exactly. I don't know that, or it changes my expectations for myself.
Hmm.
This is how my life should be, therefore it's not.
Hmm.
And I'm isolated and I'm lonely because I'm not part of that fantastic lifestyle.
So tell me a little about the distinction between loneliness and isolation.
Hmm. So, you can be lonely in a crowd. You can be
Right.
lonely. There are different kinds of loneliness. For instance, existential loneliness. This is the feeling that no one understands your experience, that you're alone in this world, and no one can connect with you because of what you're going through. Isolation is physically removing yourself from opportunities where you can be socialized, where you can feel less lonely. So there's a fine line between the two, but usually they go hand in hand.
So if somebody feels isolated, is that something that they're responsible for?
I mean, you and I live in a community. So when we see that with one of our brothers, we usually respond or we talk about how we can respond. In the greater world, people don't have those safety nets. And if you don't have a significant other, or if you don't have a community of friends that you can go to, it's very easy to feel isolated and to fall into this loneliness trap where you don't know how to get out.
But in some people I know report being in a significant relationship, let's say a marriage or with a significant other, and still feeling lonely and isolated. How does that happen?
It's a good question. It's about needs being met and expectations about needs, and maybe not communicating when the needs are not being met. Uh, like I just said, you can be lonely in a crowd, depending on what your expectations are for that crowd or what you hope to gain from being part of a group.
Do you think people sometimes are lonely because they're fearful of entering into either relationships or into even just common everyday kind of activity? Fear like from self-esteem, low self-esteem?
Absolutely. Some of the people I've worked with who have expressed this kind of loneliness that's paralyzing also talk about how they have a fear of judgment, or they've dated and had so many bad experiences that they're just afraid to enter into that world again. And so it can be a vicious circle,
Yeah.
you know?
So sometimes hurt or fear would keep people more isolated and more lonely.
Yeah.
So as I said in the opening, young people today are reporting record high levels of loneliness, especially in that Generation Z.
Mhm.
Um, Depression, anxiety, all part of that. So they are considered to be the loneliest generation. As I mentioned, 79% reporting feelings of loneliness. So what's breaking down in their lives, do you think, Paul? And are adults listening to this? Or why is technology failing to bring us true human connection? Or are we just blaming our phones and walking away?
I know for a lot of people, the phone is an easy out. If they're feeling anxious or they have social anxiety, they're on their phone. Or they're connecting with the outside world, but in this artificial way, either on the phone talking to people or on social media. And what's lacking there is the actual physical experience of being with people, doing things, being part of a crowd. During the pandemic, all of my counseling moved from in person to online. And I can tell you, for me, it was much more difficult online because it's a different energy.
Right,
You're looking at a screen, still talking to someone, seeing them, but they're not in your presence and you're not in their presence. You
right.
respond differently to them in that way. It's the same with social media. It's artificial. It's not a replacement for people and situations and opportunities.
I, as we mentioned, as people age, of course, they lose their friends, their family, even their roles, and even oftentimes their sense of meaning. Um, so, do you feel that we're accompanying our elderly through the long loneliness of old age? Are we valuing their wisdom, or are we kind of like just warehousing people?
My personal feeling is I think that it's convenient to move people into nursing homes when they need it, if they have memory issues, or into these step down living. You go from independent to some help to maybe nursing care. What can be lacking in that is a connection with the outside world
Right.
and warehousing people and not valuing that they do have something to add. All generations have something to add to society. When you remove a significant population from our lives, then you're missing what they bring to the whole population. So I think, yes, I think older people are experiencing it more because they're removed from society more often.
Right. There's a group, as we had mentioned before, in Brussels,
Mhm.
which I think I told you a little about. It's a group called the Pappy Group, and they are a group of retirees from about 5 nursing homes who come together um, on weekends and they go clubbing. And they start with an early dinner at 5:30, and then they have uh, a spot for makeup and hair being done and clothing, etc. And then they go to a club around 11:30 and club until 2 o'clock in the morning. And it's been a huge success. There are people who are in their 80s and late 90s even who
Mhm.
are doing this and they're having a great time. And say that it kind of like brings a whole new sense of life to them. Is one of them said, loneliness needs to be elevated to a public health priority and the community spaces need to be more accessible. And instead of treating old people like children, we need to ask them how they can continue to contribute to society. And this is from one of the clubbers here who says that it's given him a whole new change of life because
Sure.
he's active and he's moving, and they all look forward to this coming together. So, in terms of that, especially older men like Mr. Klug here, often can mask loneliness with silence or anger or withdrawal. It seems that that's men seems to be less social sometimes than women, I think. So
Mhm.
why is it still considered, do you think, weak for a man to say, I'm lonely? And how do we help break that wall without shaming them?
I think it's part of it is just the what our society tells us men are supposed to be like. Men are supposed to be strong. They're not supposed to have strong emotions or experience them or talk about them. Maybe they have them, but they're not supposed to talk about them. So again, it's this vicious circle that you can't get out of when you're taught that you shouldn't be saying that you'll be weak if you say that you're lonely. And the reality is that a lot of older men experience this and they become withdrawn
Right.
and they isolate themselves because they can't talk about it. Um, women, at least up until a certain point, women were more social in our society. I watched it with my own father. When my mother died, he withdrew, even the friends that he had, he didn't want to visit. And then when he got to a point where he was ready to visit them, it seemed like they had nothing to talk about because he couldn't talk about his feelings and his loss. Uh,
Uh,
and it's a reality, it happens.
what can we do about that, do you think?
I have a lot of things that I'd like to do with society to help people who are lonely. One of the things I'm working with now is Friends 360,
Hmm.
where we invite the unhoused in for hospitality and for casework. And one of the things I've noticed is that there's a small community that has sprung up in the day room. The same people that come in, some of whom want our help, some don't, but they come because they get some community and they talk to one another and they talk with our staff. And so things like that, just having a place to go to and to talk to people who may be in your same situation has made a big difference for a lot of people. And they keep coming back because they enjoy it.
So maybe part of it would be when we are with older people, not to be afraid to bring up that topic. Are you lonely, or
Absolutely.
is there a feeling of loneliness here, or
Yeah.
to kind of normalize that and allow them
Yeah.
to talk about it?
And also to be vulnerable yourself and talk about your own loneliness because everyone experiences it.
Yeah.
This is the human condition. It's not a mental health disorder, but it can cause mental health disorders.
Right, exactly. So I think any of us have been in a room full of people talking, etc., and yet we feel completely alone.
Mhm.
What creates that kind of disconnection, do you think, Paul? And what can we actually do to reach through it? Um, is it just presence or compassion, or is there something more we can do?
Well, I think one thing we need to be is aware, personally aware of our own fears. For some people, it's the loneliness is because they can't connect, because maybe they have social anxiety. So it's facing that fear, finding ways to cope with your social anxiety, either through medication or through therapy that will help you get out of yourself and get out of the way of that social anxiety. Some of it sometimes is just feeling triangulated, that you're not part of the conversation and knowing how to jump into a conversation or start to make conversation with people. But the number one thing is the willingness to be able to recognize what you need to work on if you're feeling lonely, and then finding the help that you need to work on that.
Because loneliness then is not just like um, the inability to connect. There could be a lot of other factors that are causing this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
On the cross, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Probably one of the most guttural cries of loneliness and
Mhm.
despair in many ways.
Absolutely.
So, what does it mean for those who feel abandoned today? Can Christ's darkest hour, you think, offer light to someone in their position?
I think it's hard to pray sometimes when you feel lonely. Um, I don't know if it's something that I've ever looked to solve my loneliness. But you bring up a really good point. Even Jesus felt loneliness. More than that, even when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he asked his disciples to sit with him for 1 hour and they fell asleep.
Right.
And his comment afterwards was clearly that he was lonely
Hmm.
and expected them to be there for him. I work with people every day who are lonely, who fundamentally feel loneliness because they're living on the street. And my approach to it is to make sure that they feel heard and seen, that they have the dignity they need to be able to ask for what they need. And sometimes it's just that simple, that we open our hearts to people, that we're willing to listen, that we're aware of what their needs are, at least have an idea, that we're open to listen to that. And that can make all the difference for people.
I'm sure that's true, and it would be interesting to consider the fact that someone who is homeless and living on the streets could have a real acute sense of loneliness, which would be compounded by the fact of their situation. There's really nobody there for them oftentimes,
Hmm.
except the friars in a program like yours or something like that. Hmm.
Yeah.
We idolize independence a lot in our culture. Being strong, as you mentioned, in terms of masculinity, where we ask people to be self-sufficient, not needing anyone really, be that strong John Wayne kind of
Hmm.
figure.
Right.
Um, so have we made loneliness, do you think, the price of our independence? And how do you think we could reclaim more of an interdependence with each other without feeling weak?
I think loneliness is in our society is seen as a stigma and something that people don't want to admit. There's a degree of honesty that needs to be there, that we need to admit that we're lonely, even if we don't admit it to the people that are in our lives, that we seek help or we seek ways to be able to not be lonely. Um, some of the connections we can make are outside of ourselves. So joining groups that may be centered on some kind of a hobby that you might have, going to church and joining a church community. Even going to church can be a lonely prospect if you're not part of the worshiping community. So really getting into a community or a community of like-minded people who believe in the same thing you do, who have your values, that can help to combat loneliness because you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
Right. There's a list of things we've put together here. And maybe if you could just comment on them, we're going to
Sure.
put them up on the screen too. So some of the ways to combat loneliness. Learn more about being comfortable in your own company.
Excellent.
What do you think about that? How
Know
do you do that?
yourself.
Know yourself.
Know what you want to do, what you don't want to do. Um, just understand the things that feed you and things that don't.
Try and open up to people you know.
That can be a hard one for a lot of people. Reconnection is important, especially after the pandemic. We were isolated even within our communities for a good 2 years. Um, and so reconnection became an important part of reclaiming who we were before the pandemic. Well, it's also true of loneliness. If you had friends or family that you were connected with that you fell away from, reconnecting with them, reestablishing those connections is really important.
Take it slow.
Exactly. It is not a race. This is not a task. This is really righting the things that are wrong in your life that you want to make it happier.
Make new connections.
Absolutely. You know, being able to make new connections is a way to feel more alive, feel like you're experiencing life and meeting new people and doing new things. That can be exciting.
Hmm. And fearful, I would imagine, for some people.
Sure.
Try not to compare yourself to others.
Right. As I spoke about that FOMO, fear of missing out.
Uh,
Um, Everyone's life is different. Everyone puts on a good face and wants everyone to think that they're living the best life, especially on social media. Just know that there's another side to that story, that those people too are experiencing loneliness.
look after yourself.
Self care is important in anything. Being able to understand when you need to take a break. Personally, myself, I am an introvert. I need time alone. One day on the weekend, I spend a day in my room just doing hobbies or resting, reading. That really helps to energize me so that I can be on with the people I work with the people I live with,
Mhm.
so that I can be present to them.
And last, try talk therapy.
Well, as a therapist, I'd always say that. It's really important to go in with goals, to understand what it is you want to accomplish, and to make sure that your therapist is in line with your goals and also has the resources to help you.
So if you could sum this all up in terms of um, loneliness, what would you tell our viewers?
I would say you don't have to struggle with loneliness. There are people out there who can help you. There are ways you can help yourself. There are resources in your community that you can plug into if that's what you need. But you don't have to struggle with this. You can actually overcome loneliness or at least take it away for a while. There are certain existential things that you can't change about your life that may bring you loneliness, but there are ways that you can manage it better.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
St. Francis called everyone brother, everyone sister, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. To be Franciscan is to say you are not alone. You're part of a community. Whether you're joyful or aching, surrounded or forgotten, you are not alone. God sees you. Christ, as we said today, has felt your loneliness, and we are called not to solve it all, but to sit beside it, to listen, to walk with, and to reach out. If someone crosses your mind tonight, for example, call them. If your heart aches with emptiness, say someone's name in prayer. Because every time we choose presence over isolation, we become a little more human, a little more like Christ. Thanks for watching us. I'm Father David, and this is Friar Time. If you feel you need support, we'd ask you to please contact the website www.psychologytoday.com, a website that will help you find licensed therapists.